Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the B&W Turnoverball Underbed gooseneck trailer hitch on a 2022 Ram 3500.
This fifth wheel installation kit is designed to let you install your B&W companion fifth wheel trailer hitches. The underbed design of this kit allows for full truck bed access when you're ready. It's under 5 minutes to convert your empty truck bed into a fifth wheel hitch. We'll start by unlocking our B&W hitch and installing our fifth wheel adapter. We have ours pre-assembled, but you can adjust the uprights here depending on your truck and trailer combination. At this point, the hitch is ready to attach to the trailer. There's a little clip here that you can release. Basically, it's a safety pin. Then you can swing the handle out and you can watch the jaws open. You're ready to back into your trailer now. Once you're secure under the trailer, you can reinstall the clip. Since the fifth wheel installation kit doubles as a gooseneck hitch, when you're not towing your fifth wheel, you can remove it, turn it over, and we can store it upside down in the hitch. That way we'll have full bed access.
When it comes to fifth wheels, a lot of times people think that you're going to have a lot of stuff in your bed that's going to take away from the usability of a bed when you have that hitch in place. Well, that's not the case here because this is very flat. As you can see, the safety chain loops are even pretty low profile. And this is a really great hitch, not only for the quality of the overall kit, but also the fact that this turnover ball is easily stored in the actual slot here when you're not using it. So that's really nice. You don't have to worry about carrying this around in your truck. A lot of times they'll have grease on them or grime, and it's kind of just gross. With this, you can simply put it in place whenever you're ready to use it, latch it, and you're good to hook up. When you're done, you can simply unlatch, take this, flip it around, drop it in place, latch it up, and this is going to be stored here. You also have this nice corners only shape, and that's going to keep all that grime and buildup over time when you're not using it from building up, as there's really no space for it to get down in that slot. Something else that's really nice about this design is the fact you have this nice little hold here for your finger to pull this out. You're going to see there's holes on each side of this square-like shape. So that's going to be really nice because you can drop it in place, and no matter what, it's going to be able to engage in the ball, no problem. Whenever you're ready to latch or unlatch on your driver's side rear wheel well here, you have this handle and the nice sticker to let you know what you're going to be doing. So in order to unlatch, you're going to pull this out and move to the left. Now I do have my ball in there and I want to latch it in place, no problem. Just move it to the right, push it in, and you're engaged. Now, as far as fifth wheel installs go, this is actually one of the easiest ones I've done. And then part of that is because it already does have this factory kit that you just kind of drop in place. So this is going to be a pretty simple one. You have these brackets here that you're going to run bolts through. The bolts actually here are threaded on the actual center portion. So you just run those through and then you'll attach your bracket and handle. Overall, it's pretty easy. There's no welding required. There's going to be some drilling, obviously, as you're going to have to cut out the hole and also for the safety chain loops. But really, the kit is well designed. Everything goes together really well, and the instructions are pretty straightforward. Plus, I'm here to walk you through those installs and to make sure that you get this installed properly. So speaking of that, let's head to that install. To begin our installation, I'm going to go ahead and lower down our spare tire. That's going to gain us a lot more access while working under the vehicle, and it's going to make it easier for our first initial measurements to figure out where we need to actually drill the hole. So I'm going to go ahead and lower down our spare tire. So now we're going to need to take a few quick measurements, and that's going to determine where we're actually going to be drilling our hole. So it's important to make sure that you do this step and you take your time getting the proper measurements. And so the first measurement we're going to get is from the rear part of our cross member here, or our mount I should say, to the bed end. So we'll take our tape measure and go from there. And this is why it is a little bit easier with that spare tire out of the way. So we're right at, from the inside of that to the bed outside, right at 36 inches. So I'm going to go ahead, and in the instruction manual there's a nice little chart to do the math. So I'm going to write that down, and then we'll take our next measurement. Our next measurement, we're going to need to get the length of the bed going from this rear edge here to the front, which puts us at exactly 76 inches. So I'm going to mark that in our chart. So now I've taken our long measurement, I've subtracted it from our lower measurement, and then you're also going to subtract 5 3/4 based on the instructions. So that's going to give you the center where we're going to actually mount the hole to the front of the cab. And also you're going to want to measure your trailer's coupler, and that way you can also determine cab clearance. So if you have your trailer handy, you're going to want to follow the instruction manual to get that measurement as well. So now that we have that actually kind of figured out where we're going to be drilling, let's move along with the install. So now we're going to take down our heat shield. Again, this is going to gain us a lot more access to be able to put everything in. So you're going to see there's 3 10mm that we're going to remove here. There's also going to be 2 on this, and you can't really see them, but if you reach back, you can actually feel the heads. So go ahead and take those off. Now, I highly suggest throughout this entire process, anything that we take off, keep in an organized spot, and that way you have it all when you install it back. It's going to make it a lot easier and save a lot of headache knowing that you have all your hardware. So let's get these removed. So now set your heat shield aside because we'll reinstall it later. So now I'm actually going to remove our exhaust isolators here, or at least the exhaust from the hangers, and that's going to gain us a lot more room for when we put this in place. It's going to allow us to kind of move this exhaust, because as you can see, it's pretty rigid right now, and you're going to want to have that to be able to get some of these bolts in place. So go ahead, we're going to want to remove this. Now these can be tricky just because they're kind of stuck in that rubber. So to help it along, get a little bit of silicone that I'm going to spray here, and using my pry bar, we should be able to get this off. Now, I actually have an exhaust isolator removal tool here. They're kind of handy at sometimes to kind of just pry these, and all of these seem extremely stiff, so I'm going to kind of have to work at all of them to just kind of move it down a bit. But stay steadfast on it and we'll get this off. So using my pry bar, I think this is going to really get me the best here. I'm just kind of using the exhaust as a fulcrum here, and we'll just kind of push. Getting close. Now using the welded on tab for our hanger. That gives me a nice little ledge here. And just about there. There we go. So that one's loose. You can see it's still extremely rigid. So I'm going to go ahead, and we have isolators. There's going to be 2 of them kind of towards the center there. I'm going to remove those as well. So we have the exhaust isolators removed, and you're going to see it's gained us just a little bit of wiggle. That probably should be enough just to kind of gain us a little bit of access to some of the bolt holes, as well as getting it in place. So there are exhaust hangers further up, but I think this should be just fine. So now we're going to need to figure out where we're going to actually mount, or drill our hole, I should say. And the great thing about the B&W kits is they do come with a lot of nice features and tools. The instructions are really good, and part of that is they have this bracket here. And what this bracket does is lets us know where we're actually going to put our center hole. So just sliding this, the cab is facing forward obviously, so we're going to go on the cab side and then just slide this to where these align. And you're going to see the slot on this is the exact width of the hole here. So you know you have it perfectly centered up. And once you do, I'm just using some vice grips here. You can go ahead and clamp that in place. C-clamp would work all the same, whatever you need to do. And that way it just doesn't move around when you're making that mark. Now I've also gone ahead and pressed this up against the bottom of the bed so it's sitting flat. Now you're going to notice on the bracket there's a square hole and a circular hole, and the reason being is that's depending on if you have the reinforced plates. So since we do not have our reinforcement plates welded on here, we'll be using this circular hole, and really that's just to account for that offset thickness, and that way it lines it up perfect to where you need to be. So I'll be using the center or the circular hole here. If you have a little permanent marker that you can get the tip in there, by all means, that's a great option to mark it. I actually have a punch here, and so I'm going to just throw a little dimple in there. That way I can get my drill bit to sit in there nice. So now that we have our indentation marked, we can go ahead and remove our bracket. You can see I have my punch mark. right there. So I'm gonna actually take a small drill bit, 1/4 inch or whatever size is fine, and this is gonna be our center point here. That way we can get our hole saw in place. So go ahead and make a nice little pilot hole. Now, if you have a bed liner, it could be a little tricky, so make sure that you drill all the way up. Okay, so now we have our center hole lined up. So now we have our hole here. It's going to be nice and easy for me to come back with a 3.5 inch hole saw and make our hole. Now, if you've never drilled through a bed liner before, it kind of can catch a little bit. So when doing this, a lot of times I'll actually use my feet to keep the drill from kind of walking away from me. But let's go ahead, we'll enlarge that pilot hole real quick. All right, and now we begin drilling. So now we have our hole nice and cleanly cut. I'm gonna go back with a file real quick and kind of just get some of these burrs knocked down. That way it's nice and smooth in there. Now be careful, these metal shavings obviously can make for a bad time, so use some gloves, I highly recommend that. But going through, I can see if there's any more burrs, just get these nice and smooth. Now once you're happy that this is nice and cleaned up and the burrs are smoothed out, we're going to throw a little bit of just enamel here. We're going to use clear, black, honestly whatever paint you have handy, but that's just going to coat that raw metal, and that way it doesn't cause rust or corrosion over time. Now instead of just spraying this and having overspray, a little tip, in the kit you're going to see that there's a cardboard cutout with the circle here. I think that actually acts as a pretty good template to kind of keep our overspray in check. So with that lined up, I'll just go ahead and spray our edges here. Now you're going to want to check the cross member here. Now sometimes there's some plastic clips that are holding on some wiring. Ours doesn't have that, but you're going to want to go ahead and remove those. And then next after that, you're going to want to grab our spacer blocks here. Now these are going to go into place and they're actually going to align. The flanges need to be facing down and they're going to align with these holes. Now to get them in can be tricky because the clearances are pretty tight. So we're actually having to use the raised portion of the actual bed rails here. You can see the corrugation. The best way that I've found so far is going in from the cab side. So I'll show you how to do that. Feeding our long end in first and kind of just slide that in that channel and then slowly push my way down. And we can get these aligned. Go ahead and repeat the same process on the other side. Now this side can get a little bit tricky as we have our hard brake lines here. There is enough gap to where we don't have to remove that bracket. Just be careful. Putting the long end in here first. I can just slide this along. It's gonna be kind of tricky as far as getting a spot for your hands to feed this in. As you can tell, it's kind of a tight spot, but we are able to get this slid in pretty easy. Now we're gonna get ready to put our center section up, but a little tip, sometimes with this nice powder coating that they put in, the threads actually have that powder coating in them, and it's gonna make it a little bit tougher to get these tightened down once it's up in place. So to save a little bit of headache and a little bit of elbow grease, we're gonna go ahead and take one of the bolts, and I'm actually gonna kind of just zip these down through the 4 threaded holes, and that way it kind of cleans that powder coating out. Now you're gonna wanna grab an extra set of hands, and the orientation that you're gonna have this, you're gonna see we have our latch handle. That's gonna go on the driver's side towards the cab, and this is gonna go into place. Now we have 2 holes here, 2 holes here. And we're gonna just kind of thread these in place. Once it's in place, that way it holds it, so I have my 4 bolts ready to go. So be careful of your brake lines here. That's where you really want to make sure that you're not putting pressure on those, as it can damage them. So lifting this in place, kind of tuck this over the exhausts, pull those lines out of ways, and then holding it here, go ahead and thread in your bolts. So just a little tip, this hole is actually offset on the whole center section. So you want that shorter offset to be towards the cab and the longer one in the back. Your handle should be closer to the front side of this rail. So make sure you have it in the proper orientation and have these at least in place. So now, before tightening these down, we're gonna go grab our other hardware and get these placed on our little brackets here. So now we're going to thread these in. Now, if you need to kind of align this, you still have that mobility. It might get a little tricky as it can move around, but just kind of get those threads started on one of them, and the other one should be a lot easier. So now you're going to want to come up with a lifting device in order to raise the hitch up into place, and that way it's going to sit up as high as it needs to, and when we tighten it, it's going to be exactly where we want it. Now there's a few different ways to do this. I'm just going to be using some blocks of woods and a ratchet strap, and that's going to cinch that up for me. You can also actually get a long piece of wood, like a 2x6 or whatever, a 1x, and just kind of run that across your wheel wells, and that's going to work as well. Just basically anchoring this up, so whatever works best for you. So what I'm going to be doing is just ratchet strap this up, and you can see it's already starting to pull up there. And I think that's going to set it up pretty well. Now also, it can move a little bit laterally just because those bolts aren't tightened up, so this is a good time. You can actually kind of wiggle this a little bit and adjust it to where it's perfectly aligned with that hole. So now we're going to tighten the 4 bolts that go into our little blocks here. You can hit them with an impact nice and tight, and we're going to go back with the torque wrench. So go ahead and tighten these up. Now these obviously are going to be pretty accessible and nice and easy to get to. The other ones I'm probably going to be using a swivel. Unfortunately, I tried to use a swivel on our impact. It really doesn't have a whole lot of access because the exhaust is lined up pretty much with the actual hardware. So I have a short well 15/16 on a 1/2 inch ratchet here. So that's going to be our method of tightening this down for now. So now we're going to go back with a torque wrench, and we're going to set our torque settings to the manufacturer's recommendations and the instructions, and go ahead and tighten all 4 of these down. So with these torqued down to spec, now I can go back and tighten these up. I'm going to just use a ratcheting 15/16 wrench, and that's going to gain me access to kind of get these in enough to where I can get the torque wrench in. So go ahead and tighten down all 4. Now it is going to get a little bit tricky back here, so just take your time. This flap does kind of move, so just make sure that you're not making contact with this brake and making impact with it. But we'll get these all tightened down, and we're going to go back and torque it down to those same settings that we had for these 4. Now, getting these torqued down to spec can get tricky because you do have this rail here that's going to make it hard to get a socket in there. So the way that I've actually been able to do that is using a crow's foot attachment and an extension. That's allowing me to actually get on that bolt there and still be able to torque. Now with the crow's foot, you are going to have to readjust a few times just to kind of make sure that it's in that space. But go ahead and you're going to go and do all 4. Now the backside, you do have a little bit more space, so you should be able to get away with just using a regular socket. But for these ones, a crow's foot is kind of seeming to be necessary. So now we'll be installing our handle, and this just goes on the driver's side frame rail here, and it's going to attach to the actual hitch itself. But A lot of vehicles of these Rams and just trucks in general will have wiring here that's going to be causing a potential issue as we operate this. This has to slide around, and you don't want wires holding it up, and you also don't want to be chafing into your wires. So we're going to go underneath and I'll show you. I'm going to move those out of the way a little bit so this actually has access to move around and not get bound up. So back underneath the vehicle, I'm going to just kind of mock this up, and I'm going to show you where that kind of issue is with the wiring, as it's kind of hard to see. So this bracket will sit like this, and on the 3500 the handle faces down on our actual handle. So as I try to kind of line this all up, you can see this is having some issues. So where it actually is on top of the frame there, you're going to see a bundle of wires there. We're going to go ahead and move that out of the way, and that's going to gain us our clearance. So I think the best method to be able to get this out of the way, you can see it's kind of held up here, and I think what we can do is we're going to clip the zip ties that are keeping it in place and then pull it down a little, and that's going to, we'll re-zip tie it in place, and that's just going to kind of keep it out of the way for us. So first I'll take this zip tie off. Already that's starting to loosen this down quite a bit. Don't know if we have any more wiggle room elsewhere, so I think our best method here is going to be to kind of pull this back and away, and I'm going to zip tie it here onto the actual center portion of the tow package, and then also down to the brake wires, and that's going to give us a nice slot for that to go in. So I'm going to get that zip tied up and I'll show you how I did it. So I kind of just pulled down on our harness gently, and I ran it through a hole here on our bracket that's welded onto our frame, and I just zip tied it there. I've also reattached a zip tie here on the brake lines. I just kind of pulled those down. So that should gain us enough access here. I actually have a nice open hole on top of the frame rail, so our handle should go in no problem. So now that I have this open gap, I'm gonna go on the outside of the vehicle and put our handle through. Now on the 3500s, the handle will face down. 2500s, they do change, so it is important to make sure you have it in the proper orientation. And I kind of just, I'm gonna let that rest on our plastic, and then I'm gonna go back underneath the truck, and I'm gonna take our bracket here and the hardware, and we'll get that attached to the hitch. So attaching our bracket is pretty simple, but we're gonna want to gain a little bit of access as far as being able to put our bolts in place. So we're gonna want to actually loosen this up and put it in an unlock position. In order to do that, we're gonna have to actually take up the lifting device that we have, because it obviously locks this in place. So we'll go ahead and get that out of the way, and we can actually move that all since it's bolted up, and then I'll show you how to unlock this, and we'll get this all attached. So now getting the handle installed is actually pretty simple, but you are going to have to take your lifting device that we used earlier to raise the hitch in place off, as it's now bolted into place, and we're going to need to unlatch it. So to unlatch, just pull this out and then push forward, and it's going to kind of lock it in place. But I also don't want this snapping back as you're working on it, so I'm going to take an Allen key and just kind of put it in this slight gap here, and that's going to lock this out, and that way it's not going to slide back in when you're working on it. So we'll just kind of slide this here in this gap, and again, that's just going to kind of lock it out to make sure that it doesn't pinch back in place. Let's put this little end here, and all that's going to do is keep that from pushing back. It just kind of acts as a stopper, so maybe let's find a good orientation for it. I think just like that, it should hold in place. So you're going to see these square pegs here. It's going to work with our carriage bolt nicely, so you can go ahead and feed those in. So now you're going to take your bracket, and you're going to see there's a flat side here, and then this side has this smaller area. That's going to go, it's going to match up here to the actual hitch. So you can go ahead and slide those on. Oh, and there goes our safety device. But while I'm holding this in place, just make sure that your hands don't get in this mechanism. I'm just going to finger tight these on. Now on the 3500s, on the handle, there's actually a total of 4 holes for our carriage bolts. We're going to use the further inward ones, or the middle ones, I guess you could say. And then we're just simply going to feed our carriage bolts in through those. Maybe. There we go. And then our next one. and those are going to slide into our bracket. And then go ahead and put the nuts included in the hardware and just hand tighten those down. Now make sure that your carriage bolts are seated in those squares, and you're going to want to tighten these down with a 9/16 socket. And we're going to go back with a torque wrench, so just make sure that it's tight and in place, and then we'll actually get the proper setting. Now these may get tricky, so you might have to latch or unlatch the actual hitch itself to get to some of these, and you might have to swap out to a swivel, or even a ratcheting wrench would work well here, but go ahead and tighten these back ones down. Now we're going to go back with our torque wrench and our 9/16 and get these torqued to spec. Now these are a different torque setting than we have done by a significant amount compared to these bolts, so make sure you check your instruction manual to get that proper torque setting. So once we have these all torqued, you're going to want to actuate the handle a few times to make sure that all of our clearances are good. And something else that you're really going to want to make sure is these brake lines that go to this bracket. Obviously make sure your handle's not tied into those, it's not rubbing against them. So I do have a few here that I think maybe over time could chafe them, so I'm going to just kind of pull these wires back a little bit and zip tie them up. So just follow your handle and make sure that there's no interference, and if there is, just kind of move those wires out of the way and you'll be good. So now we're going to be drilling for our safety chain loops, and this is again one of those testaments to B&W really having awesome quality, not only in their product but in their instructions. They have this nice safety chain U-bolt drill guide. So first step, make sure that your latch is actually engaged, and that way you can just take your ball, let it sit there, and it's going to stick out a little, and that's going to allow us to put our template here, slide that over, and as you can see, that's going to make it nice and easy for us to get our holes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a small drill bit here and just kind of mark those holes by drilling through. Now these back holes actually kind of seem to give me a little more kickback than the front ones, and I think it's just the fact that that metal might be double stacked there. So if you think that you're drilling in the wrong spot, just continue on. As long as you're following that template and you had the template facing back like that, you will be fine. Now at this point, instead of using a larger drill bit, I found that you get a lot cleaner holes and a little more control using a step bit. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to step these out, and keeping my U-bolt here handy, I'm going to actually go through and test fit those holes just to make sure that these can clear through. So let's go ahead and we'll enlarge all of these. Now you can see we're pretty close to getting through these. I'm going to enlarge them a little bit more, but what you can see here is that step bit has left that layer of metal that's below there. It's still pretty small to where this won't pass through, so we are probably going to have to either go on the backside with the step bit or just get the larger drill bit, but you at least have a nice size pilot hole to kind of just go through and clean that little rest out. So I'm going to continue on with my other two holes first. So I've gone through and I've actually taken my step bit and I just ran that through all the way, as this is almost the same diameter as the U-bolt. So what we're looking for here, that should slide in place, and sometimes the threads can kind of get caught, but once you're through, then it's still easy to move, and that's going to be fine because we're going to be tightening these down. As long as it can slide on this portion of the U-bolt, we'll be good. So now I'm going to go through and vacuum this up real quick, and then I'm going to spray a little bit of spray paint here just for that raw metal again, just like we did here. Once that paint dries, you can go ahead and drop these in place, and then we'll head underneath the truck. Now underneath, you can see we have our conical spring here, put the larger end through here. And then you're going to take your nut and just tighten this on enough, and we'll go back and tighten all of them down, but we'll get this in place first. Make sure your spring is kind of pushed up a decent amount, because sometimes those can actually get in the threads, making it rather difficult to get these tightened up. Now we'll go back with our 15/16, and we're going to tighten these down to where the bottom head of this U-bolt is flush with the bottom of the nut. So go ahead and tighten these all down. So now all we really have to do is get our heat shield back on, our exhaust mounted back up on the brackets, and our spare tire raised back up, and then we're ready to hook up to our fifth wheel. So hopefully this video helps you get your hitch installed. And that was a look and install of the B&W Turnoverball Underbed Gooseneck trailer hitch for a 2022 Ram 3500.